In a fractured, post-apocalyptic America, where civilization has crumbled into chaos, the drifter returns in Vol.2, relentlessly hunted across vast, desolate wastelands. Tormented by a haunted past and pursued by shadowy enemies, he must navigate treacherous terrain and forge uneasy alliances with desperate survivors. As each step unveils more secrets of a long-forgotten world, his journey becomes a race against time, a struggle to escape his relentless pursuers and confront the inner demons that threaten to consume him. In a landscape where trust is scarce and survival is a daily battle, the drifter's quest for redemption could hold the key to restoring hope in a shattered society. A lone figure stands atop a crumbling overpass, the setting sun casting long shadows across a desolate landscape. The drifter's weathered face bears the scars of countless battles, both within and without. His eyes, once bright with purpose, now scan the horizon with weary vigilance. In the distance, black smoke spirals upward, marking another fallen sanctuary. He clutches a tattered photograph, edges worn from years of handling. For a moment, remembrance softens his hardened features as he traces a finger across the faded image. Behind him, the faint rumble of engines grows steadily louder. They're coming. Again, always coming. The drifter tucks the photo away and checks his rifle. A deep breath, a silent vow. Before we journey further into this wasteland together, tell us where you're watching from and subscribe now. Tomorrow's chapter reveals the terrifying truth about who's hunting our survivor. The sun hung low over the broken territories, casting an amber glow across the skeletal remains of what was once the American Southwest. The drifter moved with practiced caution through the ruins of a small town, nameless now, like so many others. His boots kicked up dust that had long settled over the abandoned streets, the only witness to his passage, aside from the hollow windows, of collapsed buildings that seemed to watch his every move. Reaching into his weathered pack, the drifter pulled out a dented canteen. One careful sip. Water was precious, more valuable than the bullets strapped across his chest or the faded bills some communities still traded with. He'd learned to measure his survival in small, careful portions. Sips of water, moments of rest, fragments of trust. Rook's trading post lay 3 days ahead if he maintained his pace. The thought brought little comfort. Sanctuary had become a relative term in this new world, often nothing more than a pause between one danger and the next. Still, Rook was as close to an ally as the drifter had found in the 5 years since the collapse. It had been nearly 6 months since he'd last passed through. 6 months of constant movement, of sleeping with one eye open, of following whispered rumors about a place called Haven. 6 months of being hunted. The drifter checked his compass, a brass antique that had belonged to his father, one of the few personal items he allowed himself to carry. The needle trembled slightly before settling on north. Technology had failed when the grid went down, but some older ways had proven more resilient. As the light faded, he made camp in the hollowed-out shell of a gas station, positioning himself with a clear view of both entrances. He set up his tripwires, tin, guns and scrap metal that would alert him to any unwelcome visitors in the night. From his pack, he retrieved a small leather-bound journal, its pages filled with meticulous notes and crude maps. Day 174. He whispered as he wrote, his voice rough from disuse. Still no sign of Mercer's men. Supplies holding, milepost 37 marker. Spotted. Heading remains true. Water purification tablets running low. The scratching of his pencil was the only sound besides the occasional whistle of wind through the broken windows. When he finished, he closed the journal and ran his fingers over the embossed initials on the cover. LRS. Not his own, but those of the man who had once saved his life, only to die in his arms. A debt unpaid, a distant howl broke the silence. Coyotes, most likely, though the collapse had given rise to other things that hunted in the dark. The drifter's hand instinctively moved to his holstered revolver. 8 rounds remained, plus the 12 in his rifle. Not enough if he encountered Mercer's patrol again, but perhaps enough to buy him time to escape. Sleep came in fitful bursts, as it always did. In his dreams, faces from the past returned, some accusatory, others pleading. His wife Emma reaching for him as flames consumed their home. His daughter, Sarah, calling for him as strangers dragged her away. And always the cold eyes of Colonel Mercer watching from the shadows, patient and calculating. Dawn broke harsh and unforgiving. The drifter woke with the first light, packed his modest camp, and continued east. His movements were economical, born from years of surviving on the margins. Each step was carefully placed, each glance deliberately sweeping the terrain for signs of danger or opportunity. By midday, the heat had become oppressive. The drifter pulled a faded baseball cap lower over his eyes. His skin had long ago been weathered to leather by the unforgiving sun, but his eyes needed protection. Good vision meant survival. The landscape gradually transformed from urban decay to open wasteland. Twisted metal and concrete gave way to cracked earth and sparse, stubborn vegetation. In the distance, a plume of dust suggested movement, perhaps a scavenger caravan or nomadic community. The drifter changed course slightly, preferring to avoid contact when possible. People meant complications, yet fate, it seemed, had other plans. As he crested a small rise, the drifter spotted a vehicle half buried in sand, an old pickup truck, its paint blistered and peeling. Movement caught his eye, a figure struggling beneath the raised hood. Instinct told him to pass by. Experience had taught him that apparent vulnerability often concealed a trap. But something else, something he'd tried to bury along with his old life, made him pause. Through his rifle's scope, he observed the scene carefully. A woman, early 40s perhaps, though age was difficult to gauge in the wasteland. Her clothes were dusty but not ragged, suggesting she wasn't a drifter like himself. Her movements as she worked on the engine showed familiarity with mechanics. Most tellingly, she worked alone. No lookout, no companions, either very foolish or very capable. The drifter weighed his options. Moving on meant safety, but also meant leaving someone potentially in danger. Approaching meant risk, but possibly information or even temporary alliance. Before he could decide, the decision was made for him. 3 figures emerged from behind a nearby dune, approaching the woman with the familiar predatory stance of wasteland raiders. The woman noticed too late, reaching for a weapon, but finding herself surrounded. The drifter sighed. Raiders were a plague worse than the radiation zones. He'd encountered too many of their victims over the years. The lucky ones had only been robbed. He adjusted his position, bringing his rifle to bear. Through the scope he could see the bandanas covering the raiders' faces, the crude weapons in their hands, the woman's defiant but fearful stance. His finger hovered over the trigger. 1 shot, a raider fell. 2 more shots in quick succession. The remaining raiders barely had time to identify the source of the attack before they joined their companion on the ground. The woman stood frozen for a moment, then dropped to a defensive crouch, scanning the horizon. Smart. The drifter raised his empty hand and slowly stood from his position, keeping his rifle pointed downward. Approaching carefully, he maintained a respectable distance. "Vehicle trouble?" he asked, his voice gravelly from disuse. The woman regarded him with suspicion. "Fuel lines clogged. Nothing fatal." Her hand remained near a holstered pistol at her hip. "Thanks for the assist, but I had it under control." 3 on 1. "Bad odds," she shrugged. "I've seen worse." Her eyes swept over him, assessing. "You're traveling light for these parts. Solo, too." It wasn't a question, but the drifter nodded anyway. "Heading east. Rook's place?" When he didn't answer, she continued, "That's where most travelers are bound. Not much else this way except the Deadlands. You know Rook." "Everyone knows Rook," she replied, turning back to the truck's engine. "Man's made himself essential. Parts, information, shelter. If it has value, Rook trades in it." The drifter watched as she reconnected a fuel line. "You have a name?" Everyone has a name. She wiped her hands on a rag. Most choose not to share them with strangers carrying high-powered rifles. That earned a slight nod of acknowledgement. Fair enough. After a moment she sighed. Elena used to be Dr. Elena Reyes before medical degrees became worthless. A doctor? Trauma surgeon. Now I'm a glorified field medic for whoever can trade for my services. Elena slammed the hood shut. And you? Got a name, stranger? The drifter hesitated. Names had power in this new world. They created connections, expectations, targets. Some call me the drifter. Elena raised an eyebrow. Dramatic. Not my choice. It never is, she said, climbing into the driver's seat. The engine coughed, sputtered, then roared to life. I'm headed to Rook's myself. Need to restock my supplies. You want a ride, drifter? Consider it payment for saving my hide. Again, instinct. Warned caution. But the prospect of reaching Rook's trading post sooner, of gaining precious hours while Mercer's scouts combed the wasteland, was too valuable to dismiss. Obliged, he said simply, collecting his pack. The truck's interior was surprisingly well maintained. Maps lined the dashboard, marked with annotations, medical. Supplies filled the back seat, organized in labeled containers. Elena drove with confidence, navigating the uneven terrain with the ease of familiarity. You make this trip often, the drifter observed. Elena kept her eyes on the ruined highway ahead. Monthly circuit. There are settlements that depend on medical care, small communities trying to rebuild. Dangerous occupation, says the man traveling alone through raider territory. She glanced at him. We all have our reasons for the risks we take. They fell into silence after that, the rumble of the engine and the crunch of tires on broken asphalt, the only sounds. The drifter allowed himself to relax marginally, though his hand never strayed far from his weapon. As the sun began to set, Elena pulled the truck behind the shell of an old motel. We'll stop here for the night, she said. 2. Dangerous to drive after dark. The headlights attract attention, and there are sinkholes along this stretch. The drifter nodded, helping her set up a small camp in one of the less damaged rooms. Eleanor produced a portable stove and heated a can of preserved stew, dividing it between 2 metal bowls. Real food, she said, passing him a portion. Not the irradiated crap from the old days, grown in the agricultural commune near New Boulder. The drifter accepted the bowl with a nod of thanks. The warm food was a luxury he rarely experienced. As they ate, Elena studied him with clinical interest. You've been on the road a long time. It wasn't a question, but he answered anyway. 5 years, give or take. Running from something or toward something? The drifter met her gaze steadily. Both. Eleanor nodded, understanding in her eyes. Most of us are. The world ended, but somehow we're still here, carrying on like we have a purpose. She set her empty bowl aside. What's east of Rook's that's drawing you there? The drifter considered how much to share. Information was currency, but it could also be a liability. Heard rumors of a place, Haven. Eleanor's expression changed subtly. Haven is a myth, a bedtime story people tell themselves to make the wasteland more bearable. You've heard of it. Everyone's heard of it. A community that survived the collapse. Intact, clean water, sustainable agriculture, solar power. No raiders, no warlords, no radiation zones. She shook her head. If such a place existed, don't you think we'd all be there by now? The drifter reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object, setting it on the floor between them. A military-grade data drive, its metal casing scratched, but intact. Elena stared at it. What is that? Found it on a dead federal emergency management agent 3 months back. Encryptions were complex, but I found someone who could break them. He tapped the drive. Coordinates, supply manifests, infrastructure reports, Haven exists. Then why tell me? Eleanor asked, suspicion returning to her eyes. If you found El Dorado, why share the map? The drifter returned the drive to his pocket. Because Mercer's men are also looking for it, and they're looking for me. Recognition flickered across Elena's face. Mercer, as in Colonel Richard Mercer, the butcher of the Western Territories. The same. Jesus. Elena's voice dropped. What did you do to get his attention? I existed, the drifter said simply, and I know things he wants to keep buried. They lapsed into silence, the weight of his words settling between them. Finally, Elena spoke again. Get some rest. I'll take first watch. We've got a long drive tomorrow if we want to reach Rook's by nightfall. The drifter nodded, stretching out on his bedroll, but keeping his rifle within arm's reach. Sleep came easier than usual, the presence of another person, even one he barely knew, providing a sense of security he rarely experienced. His dreams that night were different, still filled with faces from the past, but this time they weren't. Accusing or pleading, they were waiting, expecting, as if something long dormant was finally being set in motion. In the morning they set out as dawn broke, the eastern sky painted in bands of pink and gold. Elena drove steadily, occasionally pointing out landmarks or danger zones. The drifter remained vigilant, scanning the horizon for signs of pursuit. By late afternoon, the outline of Rook's trading post came into view, a collection of reinforced buildings surrounded by a high fence assembled from salvaged materials. Guard towers marked each corner, and the gate was manned by armed sentries. Home sweet home, Elena murmured as they approached. At least for the next few days. The guards recognized Elena's truck, waving them through after a cursory inspection. Inside, the trading post bustled with activity. Traders displayed their wares on makeshift tables. Travelers exchanged news and rumors. Armed mercenaries stood watch, their expressions neutral, but their eyes alert. Elena parked near a building marked, with a faded red cross. The clinic, she explained. Rook lets me set up shop. Whenever I'm in town, stop by if you need patching up. She studied him for a moment longer. And Drifter, be careful who you mention haven to around here. Not everyone would use that information wisely. With that warning, she collected her medical supplies and departed, leaving the drifter alone amidst the controlled chaos of the trading post. He adjusted his pack and headed toward the central building, a converted warehouse where Rook conducted his business. The doors were guarded by two men with automatic weapons, their faces impassive as they frisked him and relieved him of his rifle, though they allowed him to keep his sidearm. Inside, Rook sat behind a desk cluttered with maps, ledgers, and various trinkets from the old world. A heavy-set man, with a greying beard and calculating eyes, Rook had built his empire on information as much as trade goods. The drifter returns, Rook said, setting aside a ledger. Been a while. Thought Mercer's boys might have finally caught up. With you? Not for lack of trying, the drifter replied, taking the offered seat across from Rook. Heard you've been making waves, asking questions about places that don't exist. The drifter met Rook's gaze steadily. I need information. Information costs more than bullets or medicine these days. Rook leaned forward. What do you have to trade? Without a word, the drifter reached into his pack and placed a small object on the desk, a military-grade satellite phone. Still in working condition, Rook's eyes widened slightly. Such technology was incredibly rare since the communications grid collapsed. Where did you get this? Does it matter? I suppose not. Rook picked up the device, examining it with expert hands. This buys you quite a bit of information. What do you want to know? The drifter leaned forward, his voice low. Tell me about Haven, and tell me how to lose Mercer's men for good. Rook's expression grew serious. Those are dangerous questions, even for a man with your particular talents. He sighed heavily. But a deal's a deal. Come back after sundown. We'll talk then when fewer ears are listening. As the drifter left Rook's office, he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. In the bustling marketplace, amidst traders and travelers, someone's eyes followed his movements. Someone who recognized him not as the drifter, but as the man he used to be, the man Colonel Mercer wanted dead. The game of hunter and hunted was far from over. It had only entered a new phase. Night fell over Rook's trading post like a heavy blanket, muffling the day's activities into subdued murmurs. Lanterns cast long shadows across the compound as the drifter made his way back to Rook's headquarters, senses alert to the rhythm of the settlement. Something felt off. Conversations that stopped as he passed, glances that lingered too long, the subtle repositioning of Rook's guards. Inside the main building, the usual bustle of trade had quieted. Rook sat alone at his desk, a bottle of amber, liquid and 2 glasses set before him. The trader's usual calculating demeanor seemed subdued, his eyes darting occasionally to the windows. "Shut the door," Rook instructed, pouring a measure into each glass. "And you might want to take a seat. What I'm about to tell you isn't the kind of news best received standing." The drifter closed the door, but remained standing, his back positioned against the wall with a clear view of both the entrance and the side door. "I prefer to stay on my feet." Rook shrugged and pushed 1 glass forward. "Your call. Drink, I'll pass." "Suit yourself." Rook downed his glass in 1 swallow, then leaned forward. "Haven exists. It's not just rumors or desperate hopes. It's real. And it's exactly what people say it is, maybe more." The drifter's expression remained impassive. "I know. I've seen the data. I need location. It's not that simple." Rook refilled his glass. "Haven isn't just hiding from people like you and me. It's hiding from Mercer and what's left of the government. They've got some kind of shield, electronic countermeasures that scramble communications and tracking systems. The only way in is with a guide. And you know such a guide." Rook's laugh held no humor. "I know everything worth knowing in these parts. That's how I've survived this long." He pulled a folded map from his desk drawer. "There's a woman, goes by Phoenix, leads a small group that makes supply runs between isolated communities. Word is she came from Haven originally, still has connections." The drifter studied the map as Rook marked a location roughly 100 miles northeast. "Settlement called New Prosperity. That's her base of operations. But here's where it gets complicated." A sharp crack split the air. The window behind Rook exploded inward as a bullet tore through the trader's shoulder, spraying blood across the desk. The drifter moved instantly, dropping to the floor and drawing his sidearm in one fluid motion. More shots followed, punching holes through the wooden walls. Outside, shouts and screams erupted as the trading post descended into chaos. "Mercer!" Rook gasped, clutching his wounded shoulder as he slumped behind his desk. "Somehow they knew you were here." The drifter crawled to Rook's side, ripping a strip of cloth from the trader's shirt to bind the wound. "Who else knows about Phoenix?" "No one. I swear." Rook's face had gone pale. "Secret door, behind the bookcase, leads to the tunnels. Go. I'll slow them down." The drifter hesitated, then pressed his revolver into Rook's unwounded hand. "Don't waste the bullets." With practiced efficiency, he located the hidden latch behind a row of pre-collapse books. The bookcase swung open to reveal a narrow passage. Grabbing the map and the satellite phone from Rook's desk, the drifter entered the tunnel, pulling the bookcase closed behind him. The passage was pitch black. Moving by touch alone, he followed the rough-hewn corridor, counting his steps to track distance. The sounds of gunfire grew muffled, then faded entirely. After what seemed like an eternity, his hands found a ladder leading upward. Emerging through a concealed hatch, the drifter found himself in an abandoned auto repair shop on the outskirts of the trading post. Through the broken windows, he could see Rook's compound in flames, black smoke billowing into the night sky. Armed figures moved through the chaos, tactical gear, military precision. Not simple raiders, but Mercer's elite hunters. He needed to move quickly. Retrieving his rifle from a hidden cache outside the trading post, he never fully trusted Rook's security. The drifter disappeared into the darkness, heading northeast toward New Prosperity and the mysterious Phoenix. The night provided cover, as he put distance between himself and the burning trading post. His mind raced. How had Mercer tracked him? He'd been careful, changing routes, avoiding settlements when possible. The attack had been too precise, too coordinated, as if they'd been waiting for him. Dawn found him concealed in a dried riverbed several miles from Rook's. Exhaustion pulled at him, but rest would have to wait. From his vantage point, he could see 3 vehicles moving along the broken highway, military Humvees, a rarity in the wasteland. Mercer's men, sweeping the area. The drifter pressed himself deeper into the scant cover, controlling his breathing as one vehicle slowed near his position. Through his scope, he observed 4 soldiers exit the Humvee, their movements disciplined and coordinated. They wore the distinctive black uniforms of Mercer's reclamation force, faces obscured by tactical masks with integrated gas filters. "Sweep pattern Delta," one ordered, his voice carrying in the still morning air. "He can't have gone far. Colonel wants him alive if possible, but don't take chances. This one's dangerous." The soldiers spread out, scanning the terrain with practiced efficiency. The drifter remained motionless, his weathered clothing blending with the dusty earth. Discovery meant death, or worse, capture and interrogation. Mercer's methods for extracting information were legendary in their brutality. Minutes stretched into an agonizing hour as the patrol methodically searched the area. One soldier came within 10 feet of the drifter's position, close enough that he could see the man's finger resting near the trigger of his assault rifle. A bead of sweat traced its way down the drifter's temple, but he didn't dare move to wipe it away. Finally, a radio crackled. "All units, potential sighting at Sector 7, converge and confirm." The soldiers returned to their vehicle and departed, dust billowing in their wake. The drifter remained hidden for another 30 minutes, ensuring they wouldn't double back before finally allowing himself to move. His muscles protested as he uncurled from his hiding spot. The map from Rook's office showed New Prosperity approximately 3 days' journey on foot, assuming he could avoid Mercer's patrols. He had little food, less water, and the terrain ahead was reportedly riddled with radiation hotspots from strategic strikes during the collapse. As he studied the map more carefully, the drifter noticed faint markings that hadn't been visible in Rook's dimly lit office. Annotations in the trader's meticulous handwriting, supply caches, danger zones, potential safe houses, even in death. And the drifter had little doubt that Rook had perished in the attack. The trader remained useful. One notation caught his. It did approximately a day's journey ahead, lay a small symbol labeled simply E. The doctor, Elena. If her circuit was as regular as she'd claimed, she might still be in the area, possibly with her vehicle intact. Decision made, the drifter set out toward the marked location, moving with the caution of one accustomed to being hunted. The landscape gradually shifted from cracked earth to rolling hills, dotted with scrub brush, offering marginally better concealment. By mid-afternoon, the temperature had climbed to punishing levels. The drifter rationed his water carefully, wetting his lips rather than drinking deeply. He'd survived worse conditions, but the lack of sleep combined with the relentless heat was taking its toll. As the sun began its descent, he spotted a plume of dust on the horizon, a vehicle moving fast along a barely visible track. Dropping to a prone position, he observed through his scope. The familiar pickup truck came into focus, and with it, Elena's distinctive profile behind the wheel. The drifter allowed himself a moment of calculating relief. If she'd escaped the massacre at Rook's, she might have information, and more importantly, transportation. But caution tempered hope. In the wasteland, tragedy often changed people, turned allies into opportunists. He needed to approach carefully. Elena had proven reasonable before, but circumstances had drastically changed. Mercer's hunters were scouring the region, and harboring the drifter now carried a death sentence. As the truck drew closer, the drifter positioned himself near the path it would take, partially concealed by a cluster of boulders. When it was within range, he stepped out just enough to be visible, his rifle pointed downward in a non-threatening posture. Elena slammed on the brakes, dust billowing around the vehicle. Through the windshield, he could see her expression shift from surprise to recognition to wariness. After a moment's hesitation, she reached for something in the passenger seat. Not a weapon, but a canteen, which she held up in a clear invitation. Water and information, both precious commodities in the wasteland. And perhaps, if circumstances aligned, a temporary alliance that might just keep them both alive. The drifter stepped fully into view, accepting whatever came next. In a world where each decision balanced on the knife edge between survival and destruction, sometimes the only path forward was through trust. However fragile, however temporary, Eleanor's truck idled quietly as the drifter approached, each step measured and deliberate. Her expression remained neutral, but her fingers tapped rhythmically against the steering wheel, a nervous tell at odds with her composed exterior. "You survived," she said simply when he reached the vehicle. "Barely." The drifter accepted the offered canteen, taking a careful sip before returning it. "Rooks is gone, burned to the ground." Elena's composure cracked slightly. "I know. I was at the clinic when they came. Military precision. Black uniforms. They weren't there for supplies or territory. They were there for me. I figured as much." She gestured to the passenger door. "Get in. We can't stay exposed like this. Mercer's patrols have been sweeping the area since dawn." The drifter hesitated only briefly before climbing in. Elena immediately put the truck in motion, navigating away from the established tracks and toward a ridge of low hills to the northeast. "You're heading toward new prosperity," the drifter observed. Elena shot him a sharp glance. "How do you know?" "That?" Rook marked it on a map before he was shot. "Said I could find someone there, someone who knows the way to Haven." "Phoenix," Elena said quietly, confirming his information. "She's complicated, doesn't trust easily." "You know her?" "We've crossed paths. I've patched up some of her people." Elena navigated around a cluster of rusted vehicles. She leads a group called the Pathfinders. They help people reach safe settlements, sometimes extract those trapped. In dangerous territories, the drifter processed this information in silence. Outside, the Wastelands scrolled by. Occasional ruins of homes, a gas station reclaimed by the elements, the skeletal remains of power lines marking what had once been civilization's reach. After several miles, Elena turned onto an almost invisible track that wound into a narrow canyon. The truck bounced over the uneven terrain until they reached a small clearing concealed by overhanging rock. She killed the engine and turned to face him fully. "We should be safe here for the night." This was a geological survey site before the collapse, not on any maps, and the entrance is easily missed. The drifter nodded, scanning their surroundings with practiced vigilance. The site offered good defensive position, limited approaches, clear lines of sight, natural cover. "Smart choice. I've had practice." Elena climbed out and retrieved a pack from the truck bed. "There's a natural spring further in. We can refill our water supplies and clean up." As they established a minimal camp, the drifter noticed Elena moving with careful precision, favoring her right side. "You're injured." She glanced up from where she was arranging a small fire pit. "Caught some shrapnel when they blew up the medical supplies at Rook's. Nothing vital." "Let me see." Elena hesitated, then lifted the edge of her shirt to reveal a crude bandage along her ribs, dark blood soaking through the fabric. "Like I said, it's not serious. I've treated worse with less. It needs cleaning at least." The drifter rummaged in his pack, producing a small medical kit. "May I?" Something shifted in Elena's expression, surprise perhaps at the unexpectedly gentle request. She nodded once, sitting on a flat rock as the drifter knelt beside her. Working with unexpected deftness, he removed the makeshift bandage. The wound beneath was ragged but relatively shallow, painful certainly, but not immediately life-threatening if infection could be prevented. "You've done this before," Elena observed as he cleaned the wound with antiseptic from his kit. "My wife was a nurse, before." The words emerged unbidden, surprising them both. The drifter rarely spoke of his past life. She taught me the basics. Elena remained silent as he applied a clean bandage, respecting the rare glimpse beyond his carefully maintained defenses. When he finished, she simply said, "Thank you." They shared a simple meal of dried meat and hard biscuits as darkness fell, the small fire casting flickering shadows against the canyon walls. The drifter maintained a watchful silence, but Elena seemed determined to break through it. "You know, in all my travels since the collapse, I've heard stories about a man they call the Drifter," she said, warming her hands over the flames. "Some say he was military, special forces maybe. Others claim he worked for one of those shadowy government agencies. A few think he was just an ordinary man who lost everything and found a way to survive when others didn't." The drifter's expression remained impassive. "People tell stories to make sense of things." True enough. But the interesting thing is how the stories converge. Elena studied him across the fire. They all mention a man with exceptional survival skills, moving through the wasteland like a ghost. A man collecting information about something called Haven. A man Mercer wants dead more than anyone else in what's left of the country. Your point? I'm trying to decide if helping you is a death sentence or the first intelligent choice I've made since the world ended. She tossed a small stick into the fire. Mercer controls what's left of the Southwest Territories with an iron fist. His reclamation force executes dissenters without trial. They take what they want from settlements, call it taxation for protection. Anyone who resists disappears. The drifter nodded slightly. I'm familiar with his methods. Yet you've evaded him for years. That makes you either very lucky or very dangerous. Elena leaned forward. I'm betting on the latter, and I think it has something to do with what happened at Eastbrook facility. The name sent a cold jolt through the drifter's body, though his face betrayed nothing. What do you know about Eastbrook? Only rumors that it was a government research site, that something went catastrophically wrong there just before the collapse, that Mercer was somehow involved, and that he's been systematically eliminating anyone with knowledge of what happened. Elena's eyes remained steady on his. Like you. The drifter's silence stretched, broken only by the soft crackle of the fire. Finally he spoke, his voice low. Eastbrook was developing defense systems, autonomous technologies designed to protect designated areas from both conventional and biological weapons. Project Sanctuary. Elena's eyes widened slightly. Haven, the prototype. The drifter nodded. A self-sustaining community with next-generation defenses, renewable energy, advanced agricultural systems. A blueprint for rebuilding after catastrophic events. But something went wrong. Mercer happened. The drifter's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He was supposed to oversee security for the project. Instead, he saw an opportunity. With the right information, the right technology, he could control not just security, but survival itself. When some of us objected, he made his move. And the collapse. Convenient timing. While the world was distracted by global infrastructure failures, Mercer secured key military assets, eliminated opposition, and positioned himself as the only authority left standing in the region. The drifter's eyes reflected the firelight, hard as flint. I was head of engineering at Eastbrook. My team designed the systems that make Haven possible. Mercer thinks I have information that could give him access. Override codes, backdoor protocols. Do you? The drifter met her gaze. Steadily. Would you want someone like Mercer gaining control of the last safe place on Earth? Elena considered this, then shook her head slowly. No, I've seen what he does with power. She studied him with renewed interest. So all this time, you've been searching for Haven. Why? To warn them, among other reasons. The drifter didn't elaborate, and Elena was perceptive enough not to press. We'll reach new prosperity in 2 days if we push hard, she said instead, changing the subject. Phoenix maintains a low profile, but she has contacts throughout the region. If anyone can Get you to haven safely, it's her. And why would you help me get to her? Elena smiled thinly. Because Mercer's men destroyed my medical supplies, killed patients under my care, and shot me in the process. Let's just say my professional ethics have evolved to include a healthy appreciation for revenge. The drifter nodded, understanding the sentiment all too well. We should get some rest. I'll take first watch. Wake me in 4 hours, Elena agreed, settling onto her bedroll. As she drifted into sleep, the drifter maintained his vigil, eyes scanning the darkness beyond their small camp. His mind turned over their conversation, weighing the risks of having shared even that limited information. Trust was a luxury in the wasteland, often purchased at too high a price. Yet something about Elena, her directness perhaps, or the unflinching way she had faced the truth about Mercer, suggested she might be more ally than liability. At the very least, she had resources he needed: transportation, local knowledge, and apparently connections to Phoenix. The night passed without incident. When Eleanor took over the watch, the drifter allowed himself a few hours of light sleep, always, maintaining a portion of awareness, a skill honed through years of survival. They departed at first light, Elena driving with the practiced ease of someone intimately familiar with the unforgiving terrain. The truck's path took them through increasingly rugged landscape, away from the main routes where Mercer's patrols would concentrate their search. By mid-afternoon, they had entered a region where the devastation of the collapse was even more apparent. Vast swathes of forest stood dead, trees stripped of leaves and life. Occasional Geiger counterclicks from the device mounted on Elena's dashboard warned of lingering radiation, not immediately dangerous, but a grim reminder of what had been unleashed. Targeted. Strikes, Elena explained, noting the drifter's attention to the device. Military installations in this region were hit early in the collapse. Most of the dangerous radiation has decayed, but there are still hotspots. They skirted these areas carefully, Elena following paths marked on her well-worn maps. Twice they stopped to clear debris or navigate around impassable sections of road, working together with the wordless efficiency of those accustomed to survival challenges. As the sun began to set, they found shelter in the concrete shell of an old highway maintenance building. The structure's walls were mostly intact, offering protection from both the elements and prying eyes. We'll reach New Prosperity around midday tomorrow, Elena said, as they ate a sparse dinner. There's something you should know about the settlement. The drifter raised an eyebrow questioningly. It's not like Rook's or the other trading outposts. Phoenix has established rules: no weapons displayed openly, no violence tolerated. Everyone contributes to the community in some way: labor, skills, resources. Elena gestured with her fork. It's the closest thing to pre-collapse civilization I've seen. Sounds unsustainable in this environment. That's what most people think at first. But Phoenix has somehow made it work for almost 3 years. They have defenses, subtle but effective, and they've managed to establish trade relationships with several other communities. The drifter considered this information. And they allow strangers in, conditionally. New arrivals are quarantined and vetted. Once cleared, they're given temporary status while they prove their value to the community. Elena looked at him pointedly. Your engineering background would be considered extremely valuable. I'm not looking to settle. Few are at first. She set aside her empty plate. But having a purpose beyond mere survival changes people. I've seen it happen. The drifter didn't respond, his thoughts turning to the data drive securely hidden in his pack. Haven represented something beyond New Prosperity's fragile attempt at civilization, a truly secure foundation upon which humanity might rebuild. But first, he needed to reach it, and that meant finding Phoenix. Tell me about her, he said finally. Phoenix, what's her story? Eleanor stretched, wincing slightly as the movement pulled at her injured side. No one knows for certain. She appeared about 4 years ago with a small group of followers, had knowledge, resources, and a vision for something better than scavenging through the ruins. She established new prosperity on the site of a small college campus, defensible position, existing infrastructure, arable land nearby. And her connection to Haven? She doesn't speak of it openly, but there are indicators. The technology they use, solar arrays that function better than anything I've seen elsewhere. Water purification systems beyond salvaged pre-collapse equipment. And she has information about safe routes through territories most consider impassable. The drifter nodded slowly. If Phoenix had indeed come from Haven, she might be the key, not just to finding it, but to accessing it without triggering its formidable defenses. Their conversation was interrupted by a distant sound, the distinctive rumble of vehicle engines, growing steadily louder. Both moved instantly, extinguishing their small light and gathering essential gear. The drifter moved to the narrow window, scanning the darkness. Headlights swept across the landscape perhaps 2 miles distant, following the summer route they had traveled earlier. Mercer's men, he said quietly. 3 vehicles moving in search formation. Elena cursed under her breath. They must have found our trail. We need to move now. No. The drifter's voice was calm but firm. That's what they expect. They're hoping to flush us out, force us into the open. So we just wait for them to find us, Elena hissed. We create a diversion. The drifter removed a small package from his pack, remote detonators and compact explosive charges, the kind used for demolition work in the mining communities. How much fuel do you have in your truck? Eleanor's eyes widened in understanding. About 3/4 of a tank, enough to create a significant distraction. The drifter nodded. We'll need to move fast. Once they see the explosion, they'll investigate. That gives us a narrow window to circle around them in the darkness. And my truck? That's my livelihood, my means of completing my rounds. The drifter met her gaze directly. I understand what I'm asking. I'll make sure you reach new prosperity safely, and I'll ensure you're compensated for the loss. Eleanor held his gaze for a long moment, then nodded sharply. Fine, but you'd better be right about this diversion buying us enough time. Working swiftly, they rigged the truck with the explosives, positioning it about 1/2 a mile from their shelter, aimed toward a steep ravine. The drifter set the detonator with a 30-minute delay, enough time for them to put substantial distance between themselves and the coming explosion. Traveling on foot through the night would be dangerous, but less so than facing Mercer's hunters. With only essential supplies in their packs, they set out into the darkness, navigating by starlight and Elena's remarkable knowledge of the terrain. There's an old ranger station about 7 miles northwest, she whispered, as they picked their way through a dry creek bed. We can reach it before dawn if we maintain this pace. The drifter nodded, conserving his breath. 7 miles across rough terrain in darkness was no small feat, but the alternative was worse. They had covered perhaps 2 miles when the night sky briefly turned to day. The explosion sent a shockwave rolling across the landscape, followed by the deep rumble of secondary detonations as the truck's fuel tank ignited. In the brief illumination, the drifter glimpsed Elena's face, drawn with fatigue but set with determination. That should keep them occupied, he said, and make them even. More determined to find us, she countered. They continued in silence after that, each focused on the grueling journey ahead. The ranger station represented temporary sanctuary, but both knew the true goal lay further, new prosperity and the mysterious Phoenix, who might hold the key to Haven. As they walked, the drifter found himself unusually aware of his companion. Elena moved with the quiet competence of someone who had adapted fully to post-collapse life, yet retained enough humanity to risk herself helping others. In a world where trust had become as rare as clean water, her presence beside him represented something he had nearly forgotten existed. Alliance, perhaps even the beginnings of fragile friendship. The explosion would buy them time and misdirect their pursuers, but the drifter harbored no illusions. Mercer's resources were substantial, his determination unwavering. The hunt would continue, growing only more intense as they drew closer to new prosperity and the information Phoenix possessed. 4. Now, though, they had a temporary advantage: movement in darkness, knowledge of the terrain, and a destination that might offer at least brief sanctuary. It would have to be enough. Dawn broke with pale fingers of light stretching across the eastern horizon as the Drifter and Elena reached the abandoned ranger station. The small wooden structure stood weathered, but intact, nestled against the base of a rocky outcrop that provided natural shelter from both the elements and prying eyes. Elena moved directly to a loose board on the station's rear wall, prying it away to reveal a hidden cache. "Emergency supplies," she explained, extracting a waterproof container. "Several of us in the medical circuit maintain these along common routes." The container held basic necessities: purification tablets, dried rations, a first aid kit, and most valuable of all, a hand-cranked radio. The Drifter raised an eyebrow at this last item, and Elena smiled thinly. Phoenix established a low-frequency emergency broadcast system between allied settlements. Limited range, coded messages, but effective. She set the radio on a dusty table and began turning the crank. "We can check if there's any chatter about Mercer's movements." While Elena worked the radio, the Drifter secured the building, checking sightlines and establishing a defensive position out of habit. The station's elevated location provided good visibility of the surrounding terrain, mostly scrubland interspersed, with wind-sculpted rock formations. No immediate signs of pursuit, but that meant little. Mercer's hunters were skilled trackers. "Interesting," Elena murmured, head tilted toward the radio's quiet static. "There's a lot of traffic this morning. Coded, but I recognize some of the patterns. Anything about us?" "Not specifically, but there are alerts about Mercer's forces mobilizing throughout the sector." She adjusted the frequency slightly. "They're establishing checkpoints on all major routes to new prosperity." The Drifter considered this development. "They're casting a wide net, and we're swimming straight toward it," Elena agreed, shutting off the radio. "We need to rest, but we can't stay long. The main routes are compromised, which means we'll need to take the canyon passage." "Sounds problematic." "It is." Elena opened a worn map, spreading it across the table. "The canyon, that's what everyone calls it, is a natural choke point. Treacherous terrain, limited visibility, perfect for ambush." Her finger traced a narrow passage between two mountain ranges. "But it's also the only approach to new prosperity that Mercer's vehicles can't access. Just narrow footpaths and steep climbs." The Drifter studied the map carefully. "Estimated time? Normally a full day's journey in our condition." Elena glanced at her bandaged side, then at the Drifter's exhausted posture, though he tried to conceal it. "Closer to 2. We'll need to replenish supplies before attempting it." "Recommendations." Elena pointed to a small marker on the map. "There's a settlement here, Echo Station, small trading outpost built around an old rail depot. We can resupply there, maybe even arrange for a guide through the most dangerous sections of the canyon." The Drifter nodded, committing the route to memory. "How far?" "About 4 hours on foot. But we should rest first, at least a few hours. Neither of us will survive the canyon running on empty." Though every instinct urged continued movement, the Drifter recognized the wisdom in her words. They established a simple watch rotation, with Elena taking first rest while he maintained vigilance. The morning light revealed details of their temporary sanctuary: faded posters about wildlife conservation, a dusty desk with long-dead communication equipment, and most usefully, a topographic survey map of the region mounted on one wall. While Elena slept, the Drifter carefully studied this map, noting features not marked on their travel map: seasonal watersheds, elevation changes, rocky outcroppings that might provide cover. Knowledge was survival, especially when traversing unfamiliar terrain. With pursuit close behind, when it came his turn to rest, sleep proved elusive. Fragments of memory intruded. The sterile corridors of Eastbrook facility, Emma's face as she reviewed the project schematics, Sarah's laughter as she played in their secured compound housing. The life before, the life destroyed when Mercer decided that Project Sanctuary was too valuable to remain in civilian control. He must have slept, however briefly, because Elena's hand on his shoulder startled him to alertness, his hand automatically reaching for his weapon. "Easy," she said, stepping back. "It's time to move. There's weather coming in from the west, could work to our advantage if we stay ahead of it." They departed the ranger station as clouds began gathering on the horizon. The terrain gradually shifted from scrubland to more rugged foothills as they approached Echo Station. Their pace was steady but cautious, conserving energy while maintaining awareness of potential pursuit. "Tell me about New Prosperity," the drifter said, as they navigated a dry creek bed that offered concealment. "Security protocols, community structure." Elena picked her way across loose stones. "Layered security. Outer perimeter is mostly observational. Lookouts in concealed positions who track anyone approaching. They'll have spotted us long before we reach the canyon. Inner perimeter has more conventional defenses, walls, gates, armed guards. And within, a functioning community of about 300 people. Former college campus provides habitation, workspace, central organization. They've repurposed most buildings, classrooms into living quarters, laboratories into medical facilities, agricultural studies building into actual food production. Leadership structure? Council of 7, with Phoenix as the deciding voice when consensus fails. Eleanor glanced at him. "It's not a military dictatorship, if that's what you're wondering. Decisions are communal when possible, but they've learned the hard way that sometimes quick, decisive action is necessary." The drifter nodded. The model sounded similar to what had been envisioned for Haven's governance, democratic principles tempered by the realities of survival in a hostile world. Echo Station appeared as they crested a small rise, a collection of structures clustered around an old railway depot. Unlike Rook's bustling trading post, this settlement had a more subdued atmosphere. A handful of people moved between buildings, and a small garden plot showed careful tending, despite the harsh environment. "Keep your head down and let me do the talking," Eleanor murmured as they approached. Echo Station maintains strict neutrality. They trade with everyone, including Mercer's outposts. That's allowed them to survive this long. A weathered man with a shotgun met them at the settlement's edge. His eyes widened slightly at the sight of Elena. "Doc Reyes. Didn't expect to see. You on foot? Had some vehicle trouble, Marcus." Her tone was casual but carried a warning against further questions. "Need Tor supply before continuing to New Prosperity." Marcus's gaze shifted to the drifter, taking in his dusty appearance and watchful stance. "Your friend got a name?" "He's under my care," Elena replied smoothly. "Patient confidentiality." The man seemed to accept this explanation, though his eyes lingered on the drifter with undisguised suspicion. "Supplies are low. Had a reclamation force patrol through yesterday. Took most of our water purification tablets as taxation." Elena tensed slightly at this news. "Recent patrol? Moved out this morning, heading west. Seemed in a hurry." Marcus gestured toward the main building. "Talked to Vagan's side. She's managing inventory now." As they walked toward the depot building, the drifter scanned their surroundings with practiced casualness. The settlement showed signs of recent military presence, boot prints in the dust, cigarette butts of a type favored by Mercer's men, a newly erected communications array on one rooftop. "They're monitoring this place," he said quietly to Elena. "Not surprising. Echo Station is a natural waypoint for anyone traveling between territories." She pushed open the depot door. "We'll get what we need and move on quickly." Inside, the old railway depot had been transformed into a modest trading post. Shelves lined the walls, sparsely stocked with salvaged goods and basic necessities. A middle-aged woman with streaks of grey in her dark hair looked up from behind a counter as they entered. "Elena." The woman, presumably Vega, smiled warmly. "Word is, your clinic at Rook's got hit. Glad to see you in one piece." Mostly, Elena replied, touching her injured side briefly. Need supplies for the canyon crossing, whatever you can spare. Vega's expression grew serious. Canyons more dangerous than usual these days. Reclamation forces have been searching everyone passing through, established a checkpoint at the narrow section. She lowered her voice. They're looking for someone specific, someone important enough that Mercer himself issued the orders. The drifter kept his expression neutral, though he felt Elena tense beside him. Any way around the checkpoint? Elena asked. Vega studied them both for a long moment. There's an old mining trail, treacherous. Rock slides last season made it worse. No one uses it now. She reached beneath the counter and extracted a faded map. But it's still there for those desperate enough to try. Elena examined the map. Thank you. Don't thank me. I never showed you this. Vega turned to gather supplies. And whoever you're traveling with, I hope they're worth the risk you're taking, Elena. They departed Echo Station with replenished supplies and the alternative route marked on their map. The weather system Elena had spotted earlier was moving in faster now, dark clouds building. On the horizon and a cool wind carrying the promise of rain. Storm will help cover our trail, the drifter observed, as they headed toward the canyon entrance. If it doesn't drown us first, Elena replied grimly. The mining trail follows a watershed. Flash floods are common when it rains. They reached the mouth of the canyon by mid-afternoon. The massive rock walls rose on either side, creating a natural corridor that wound deeper into the mountain range. Even at the entrance, the passage was narrow enough that no more than 3 people could walk abreast. Checkpoint is about 4 miles in, Elena said, consulting the map Vega had provided. Mining trail branches off in 2 miles. It's unmarked, deliberately obscured during the early days after the collapse. Miners trying to protect their claims. The drifter nodded, adjusting his pack. Let's move. The canyon path started easily enough. Packed dirt with occasional rocky outcroppings to navigate, but as they progressed deeper, the walls closed in further, casting the path into deepening shadow. The air grew cooler, carrying echoes of water, dripping somewhere deeper in the passage. Elena moved with surprising confidence, occasionally pointing out features. A bent metal rod embedded in rock that marked distance, scars in the stone walls from mining operations long abandoned. Despite her injury, she maintained a steady pace, pausing only occasionally to consult their map or listen for sounds of others in the canyon. Here, she said finally, stopping near what appeared to be a solid rock face. Mining trail entrance. The drifter examined the wall skeptically until Elena brushed away some loose stones at its base, revealing a narrow opening partially concealed by strategic placement of boulders. It would be a tight squeeze, especially with their packs. Ladies first? Elena offered with grim humor. I'll go. If it's a dead end, better to know quickly. The drifter removed his pack and pushed it through the opening, then followed, squeezing through the narrow gap. On the other side, a rough-hewn passage led upward at a steep angle. Old timber supports, weathered but still functional, braced the walls at intervals. The air smelled of mineral deposits and the distant scent of rain. Elena followed him through, retrieving a small light from her pack. Path follows the old mineral vein. Miners followed natural formations wherever possible, so it meanders. Map shows it eventually rejoins the main canyon beyond the checkpoint. The mining trail proved as treacherous as Vega had warned. They navigated narrow ledges, climbed crumbling rock faces, and twice had to backtrack when passages ended in collapse. The physical demands would have been challenging for anyone. With Elena's injury and their mutual exhaustion from the previous night's journey, it became a grueling test of endurance. Thunder rumbled outside the mountain. Vibrations felt through the stone around them. The storm had arrived. In some sections, water had already begun to trickle down the walls and collect in low points along their path. We need to move faster, Elena urged, as they paused to rest. This entire system will become a drainage channel once the rain intensifies. They pressed. on the path occasionally opening into wider chambers where mining operations had extracted valuable ore. Ancient equipment lay abandoned, rusted carts, pickaxes, support beams, stockpiled but never installed. In one such chamber, they discovered the remains of a more recent occupant, a skeleton dressed in tattered clothes, a backpack still beside. Elena knelt briefly, examining the remains with clinical detachment. Died several years ago. No obvious trauma, probably got lost, ran out of water. The drifter was more interested in the backpack. Searching through it, he found little of value. Molded clothing, an empty canteen, a corroded flashlight, but in a side pocket, protected. In a waterproof case, lay a journal. He pocketed it without comment. Information, even outdated, might prove useful. They continued upward, the path growing steeper. Water flow increased around their feet, first a trickle, then a steady stream that made footing treacherous. The thunder grew louder, no longer distant, but directly overhead, suggesting they were nearing the surface. "Should be a junction ahead," Elena gasped, leaning against the wall as they paused again. Her face had grown pale, her bandage showing fresh blood where exertion had reopened her wound. Path splits, one continues up to a ventilation shaft, the other descends back toward the main canyon. The drifter studied her with concern. How much further to new prosperity once we rejoin the main path? 3, maybe 4 hours in good conditions. Elena managed a weak smile. Which these aren't. The storm will slow us considerably. Before he could respond, a new sound reached them. Voices echoing through the passages ahead. Multiple people, moving, with purpose. The words were indistinct, but the disciplined cadence was unmistakable. Mercer's men. Elena's eyes widened. They shouldn't know about this route. They know we're heading to new prosperity, the drifter replied quietly. They're covering all approaches, standard search protocol. They retreated to a small side chamber, concealing themselves behind stacked timber as footsteps approached. Through a narrow gap, the drifter observed 4 soldiers in Reclamation Force uniforms moving methodically through the passage. Lights, sweeping the walls and floor. Clear signs of recent passage, one reported into a radio. Footprints in the mud heading upward. 2 individuals based on tread patterns. A voice crackled back over the radio. Intercept and identify. Command wants. The male subject taken alive if possible. The woman is expendable. The drifter felt Elena tense beside him. Their options were limited. The chamber offered concealment but no exit, except the way they had come. If the soldiers continued their methodical search, discovery was inevitable. "There's a vertical shaft in the corner," Elena whispered, barely audible. "Old air ventilation for the miners. It might connect to the surface." The shaft was little more than a jagged hole in the rock, roughly 3 feet in diameter. The drifter examined it quickly with Elena's light. Rusty metal rungs embedded in the stone led upward into darkness. Many were missing or badly corroded. "It's our only chance," Elena said as the soldiers' voices grew closer. "I'll go first. My climbing skills are better, and I can test the rungs." The drifter wanted to object. Her injury made climbing dangerous, but she was already moving, hauling herself into the shaft with remarkable agility despite her wounded side. He followed, pulling himself up just as flashlight beams swept the chamber they had vacated. They climbed in near total darkness, Elena testing each rung before trusting it with her weight. Twice, metal broke away in her hand, sending rusted fragments clattering down the shaft. The sound seemed deafening in the enclosed space, but the noise of the storm, now clearly audible above them, helped mask their ascent. After what seemed an eternity of painful progress, Elena whispered down, "I can see light. Looks like the shaft exits onto the mountainside." The final section proved the most challenging. Rain poured in through the opening above, turning the shaft into a miniature waterfall. The drifter's hands, already raw from climbing, slipped on the wet metal. Only determination, and the certain knowledge that capture meant death, kept him moving upward. Finally, They emerged onto the storm-lashed mountainside, rain immediately soaking them to the skin. The shaft exit was concealed within a cluster of boulders, invisible unless one knew exactly where to look. Below, the main canyon cut a dark scar through the landscape. Above and ahead, barely visible through the rain, lay their destination, the outer approaches to new prosperity. "Made it," Elena gasped, collapsing against a rock. Her face was alarmingly pale, her bandage now completely soaked with blood. "Just need to rest a moment." The drifter knelt beside her, concern overriding caution. "You've torn the wound open. We need to—" A flash of movement caught his eye. Too late, he registered the presence of others, figures in ponchos materializing from the rocks around them, weapons raised. "Don't move," a female voice commanded. "You've entered Pathfinder territory. Identify yourselves." Elena raised her head, a weak smile forming despite her pain. "Hello, Phoenix. Your security protocols have improved since my last visit." The woman called Phoenix lowered her rifle slightly, recognition dawning in her rain-streaked face. "Elena?" Her gaze shifted to the drifter, hardening instantly. "And company. Interesting timing, considering half of Mercer's forces are combing the region." She gestured to her team. "Get them inside. Full security protocols." 4 figures approached. 2 helped Elena to her feet, while the others flanked the drifter, their weapons not quite pointed at him, but positioned for immediate response if needed. They were led along a narrow path that wound through the rocky terrain, barely visible in the storm. "Wound needs immediate attention," the drifter said, noting Elena's increasingly labored breathing. Phoenix glanced back, her expression unreadable behind rain-spattered goggles. "Our medical team is standing by. She'll receive care." There was no warmth in her voice, only efficiency. After 20 minutes of difficult travel through the downpour, a structure came into view, not the expected settlement entrance, but a small outpost built into the mountainside, its exterior designed to blend with the natural rock formations. Had they not been led directly to it, the drifter doubted they would have noticed it at all. Inside, the contrast was striking. The facility was modern, well lit, with equipment that appeared salvaged but meticulously maintained. Personnel moved with purpose, some monitoring communications equipment, others checking defensive positions visible through reinforced windows. Elena was immediately taken to a medical area, separated from the drifter by a translucent partition. He watched as medics cut away her bloodied clothing and began treatment, their movements quick and practiced. Phoenix removed her rain gear, revealing a lean, athletic woman in her late 30s with close-cropped dark hair streaked with premature gray. A jagged scar ran from her right temple to jawline, pulling slightly at the corner of her eye. Her movements were precise, deliberate, those of someone accustomed to authority. "Weapons," she said simply, extending a hand toward the drifter. He hesitated only briefly before surrendering his rifle and sidearm. Resistance now would only undermine the fragile possibility of cooperation. Phoenix passed the weapons to one of her team, then fixed the drifter with an assessing stare. "You've led Mercer's forces directly to our doorstep. Give me one reason why I shouldn't hand you over to them and spare my people the coming conflict." "Because I have information about Haven that Mercer wants," he replied evenly. "Information that belongs with its rightful guardians, not a military dictator." Something flickered in Phoenix's eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or wariness. "Follow me." She led him to a small room equipped with basic monitoring devices, heart rate sensors, pupil dilation trackers, voice stress analyzers. The drifter recognized the setup, an interrogation room designed to detect deception. "Sit," Phoenix commanded, indicating a chair positioned beneath the sensors. When he was seated, she activated the equipment with practiced efficiency. "Now, who are you really?" "You know me as the drifter, your actual identity before the collapse." He met her gaze steadily. Dr. James Reeves, Chief Engineer, Project Sanctuary at Eastbrook Facility. Phoenix stilled, her composure cracking slightly. Impossible. James Reeves died during the initial purge. Mercer confirmed the kill himself. Mercer confirmed what he believed to be true. He found a body in my office, burned beyond recognition but wearing my ID badge. A colleague who was already dead, who sacrificed his final dignity to give me a chance to escape with critical data. Phoenix studied the monitoring equipment, then back to him. If you're really Reeves, you can verify it. Tell me something only he would know. Project Sanctuary had a fatal flaw in its initial design. The autonomous defense systems couldn't distinguish between external threats and internal conflicts. During the third simulation, the system interpreted a dispute between research teams as a security breach and sealed all access points. 3 researchers died before emergency protocols were established. That information is in the project records, not proof. The drifter leaned forward slightly. The project lead's daughter was one of those who died. Dr. Elaine Winters, Cher wrote. The core programming herself afterward, incorporating what she called the humanity protocol, a recognition system that privileged human life over security objectives. That modification isn't in any official record because it contradicted military parameters for the project. Phoenix's expression changed, something like genuine shock crossing her features before she controlled it. How did you? Because I helped her write it, and because you were there, weren't you, Dr. Winters? Or should I call you Phoenix now? The room fell silent except for the soft hum of monitoring equipment. Phoenix, or Elaine Winters, stood motionless, her carefully constructed persona momentarily fractured by this unexpected revelation. My daughter's name? She said finally, her voice barely audible. Sophia. She was 8 years old. Loved butterflies and quantum physics, an unusual combination even for a prodigy. She had your eyes and your determination. Phoenix turned away abruptly, facing the wall. When she spoke again, her voice had hardened. If you're really James Reeves, where have you been for 5 years? Why surface now? Surviving, gathering information, tracking what remained of Project Sanctuary's infrastructure while staying ahead of Mercer's hunters. The drifter, James, leaned back in the chair. As for why now, because the data I've safeguarded indicates Haven is at a critical juncture. The autonomous systems will require maintenance soon, specific recalibrations that were built into the design as a failsafe, and you conveniently have the expertise to perform these recalibrations. I designed them. So, yes, Phoenix turned back, her professional mask firmly in place once more. Even if I believed you, and I'm not saying Ido, getting you to Haven would be nearly impossible now. Mercer has clearly tracked you to this region. His forces are mobilizing as we speak, which is why we need to move quickly. A communication device on Phoenix's belt chimed. She answered it with a terse report. Reclamation forces approaching from the south and east, came the response. Approximately 20 soldiers, heavy weapons search pattern indicates they're closing in on our position. Phoenix's jaw tightened. Maintain observation. No engagement unless directly threatened. She disconnected and fixed James with a cold stare. It seems your presence has already accelerated our timeline. Before he could respond, the partition separating them from the medical area slid open. Eleanor stood there, pale but upright. Fresh bandages visible beneath a clean shirt provided by the medical team. He's telling the truth, she said quietly. And there's something else you both need to know. Phoenix frowned. You should be resting, Doctor. There's no time. Elena entered the room fully, closing the partition behind her. The communication systems at Echo Station, they've been compromised, upgraded recently with technology beyond anything we've seen in the Wasteland. I recognize the components, they're Eastbrook designs. James tensed. How would you recognize Eastbrook technology? Eleanor met his gaze steadily. Because I worked there too. Lower level than you, research assistant in the medical division. I was off-site when the purge happened. Her expression softened slightly. I knew your wife, James. Emma was brilliant. She didn't deserve what happened to her. The revelation hit him like a physical blow. All this time traveling with Elena, and she had concealed this crucial connection. You knew who I was from the beginning. I suspected, she admitted. But in this world, admitting knowledge of Eastbrook is essentially painting a target on your back. I needed to be certain before I revealed myself. Phoenix looked between them, calculation evident in her eyes. So we have the project's chief, engineer and a medical research assistant, both miraculously surviving Mercer's purge, both arriving at my doorstep just as his forces close in. Her laugh held no humor. The coincidence strains credulity. It's not coincidence, Elena said quietly. It's Mercer's endgame beginning. The systems at Haven require specific expertise to maintain. Engineering, medical, agricultural, he's been systematically eliminating anyone with that expertise to ensure Haven eventually fails without his intervention. Phoenix's communication device chimed again. Perimeter breach in Sector 4. Multiple hostiles, heavy weapons deployed. The outpost suddenly filled with activity, personnel rushing to defensive positions, equipment being secured, emergency protocols activated with practiced efficiency. Phoenix made a swift decision. Get to the emergency transport, both of you. She turned to one of her team. Peterson, full evacuation protocol. Scarlet route. The man nodded and immediately began coordinating the evacuation effort. Phoenix turned back to James and Elena. If you're who you claim to be, then you're too valuable to risk capturing. We have an emergency route to Haven, established for precisely this scenario. And you? James asked. I'll ensure the evacuation succeeds. Her expression hardened into grim determination. This outpost was always expendable. The people and the knowledge they carry are not. The building shuddered as an explosion sounded somewhere nearby. Dust filtered down from the ceiling as the lights flickered momentarily. Go now. Peterson will guide you. Phoenix checked her weapon with practiced movements. If you really are James Reeves, then Haven needs you alive far more than they need me. As they hurried toward the evacuation point, James cast one final glance back at Phoenix, at Elaine Winters, whose presumed death he had mourned along with so many others. In her face, he saw the same determination that had characterized her work at Eastbrook, now tempered by years of struggle and loss. The walls shook again with another, closer explosion. The hunt had reached its climax. But the question remained, who was truly the hunter, and who the hunted? The emergency transport, a rugged solar-electric hybrid vehicle with reinforced armor plating, thundered through the rain-lashed terrain, navigating paths that barely qualified as roads. Peterson drove with grim concentration, his weathered face illuminated by the occasional flash of lightning. In the back, James and Elena checked supplies and weapons that had been hastily loaded during their escape. 3 rifles, limited ammunition, James noted, taking inventory. Emergency rations for 5 days, medical kit, portable solar charger. He examined one of the weapons, a precision tactical rifle with advanced optics. This isn't salvaged equipment. This is recent military production. Phoenix has connections, Peterson replied without taking his eyes off the treacherous path. Sympathizers within what remains of the old government structures, people who recognize Mercer for what he is. Eleanor finished securing her freshly bandaged wound. How far to Haven from here? 2 days, assuming we don't encounter blockades or patrols. Peterson navigated around a massive fallen tree. There's a way station about 6 hours ahead where we can rest briefly and check for pursuit. James studied the terrain through the reinforced windows. The storm provided cover, but also complicated their journey. Visibility was poor, and the already difficult paths had become treacherous with mud and debris. Behind them, occasional flashes, of light marked the battle at the outpost, Phoenix and her remaining team buying them time with their lives. "She won't survive," he said quietly. Peterson's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "Phoenix has escaped worse situations. She'll either evade capture or trigger the facility's self-destruct protocols. Mercer won't take her alive. She's made certain of that." The grim certainty in his voice spoke to experiences James could only imagine. The world after the collapse had forged people like Phoenix and Peterson into something hard and resolute. Survival machines who had somehow retained their humanity despite everything. Elena checked the communication equipment. "All channels are being jammed. We can't contact New Prosperity or any other allied settlements." "Standard reclamation force tactic," Peterson confirmed. "They isolate targets before moving in. We're on our own until we reach the way station." James unfolded a map that had been stored with the supplies. Unlike the weathered, annotated maps they had used previously, this one was printed on synthetic paper, resistant to water and tearing. The route to Haven was marked with precision, including alternative paths and emergency extraction points. "This map contains information Mercer would kill for," he observed, "which is why only senior Pathfinders carry them, and why they're destroyed if capture is imminent." Peterson navigated a particularly steep descent, the vehicle's specialized tires gripping the muddy surface. "Phoenix entrusted me with this mission because I've made the journey 7 times. I know every rock and tree between here and Haven." "They've been inside Haven?" Elena asked, surprise evident in her voice. 3 times. Most guides only reach the outer security perimeter." Pride flickered briefly across Peterson's weathered features. "I've earned a higher clearance." "What's it like?" The question escaped James before he could suppress it. Despite everything he knew about Haven's specifications and systems, he had never seen the completed project. Peterson's expression softened slightly. "It's like stepping back in time, before the collapse, but better in some ways. Clean water, abundant food, medical care, schools for children. They've preserved knowledge, culture. They're building something that might actually last." The description matched the project objectives James had helped establish years ago, but hearing it confirmed as reality rather than theoretical design specifications stirred something long dormant within him. After years of mere survival, the possibility of contributing to something meaningful again seemed almost too much to hope for. "And the defenses?" he asked, professional interest overriding emotion. "Layered, sophisticated, some visible, most not." Peterson navigated around a washout in the road. The outer perimeter appears natural, rock formations, dense forest, difficult terrain, but it's monitored constantly. The inner defensive systems are more obvious: walls, checkpoints, armed security. "Beyond that," he shrugged, "above my clearance level." James nodded. The compartmentalization made sense. Even those trusted enough to guide others to Haven weren't given complete information about its security measures, a precaution against captured guides being forced to reveal vulnerabilities. "They'll be expecting us?" Elena asked. "Phoenix would have sent an emergency transmission before communications were jammed. They'll know we're coming." Peterson frowned. "They'll also heighten security given the circumstances. Our reception might not be entirely welcoming, because of me," James said quietly. Peterson met his eyes briefly in the rearview mirror. "You're an unknown variable despite your claims. Haven has survived this long by being cautious." The vehicle jolted suddenly as an explosion rocked the ground nearby. Peterson cursed, fighting to maintain control as they slid sideways in the mud. "Aerial! Patrol!" he snapped, accelerating. "They've spotted us!" Through the rain-streaked windows, James glimpsed the silhouette of a helicopter, a rarity in the resource-depleted wasteland. Its searchlight swept the terrain, and as he watched, something detached from beneath it. "Incoming!" he shouted as Peterson swerved violently. The missile struck the ground 30 feet behind them, the shockwave lifting the rear of the vehicle momentarily before it crashed back to earth. Peterson maintained control, guiding them into a narrow ravine where overhanging trees provided some cover from aerial observation. "We can't outrun a helicopter," Elena said, gripping the seat as they bounced over rough terrain. "Don't need to." Peterson pointed ahead where the ravine narrowed further, the canopy above thickening. "Terrain's on our side. They'll lose visual in half a mile, and these trees will disrupt thermal imaging." He was proved right when the helicopter's searchlight swept futilely above them, unable to penetrate the dense foliage. The sound of its engines gradually faded as they pushed deeper into the protected corridor. "They'll have ground teams converging on this area soon," James observed. "That helicopter was a spotter, not just an attack vehicle." Peterson nodded grimly. "Which means we need to abandon our current route." He made a sharp turn onto an almost invisible side path. "There's an alternative approach to the way station, but it takes us dangerously close to a radiation zone." Elena tensed visibly. "How close?" "Close enough to need precautions, not close enough for immediate danger." Peterson reached into a compartment and tossed back two small devices. "Radiation badges. They'll change color if exposure reaches dangerous levels." The path grew increasingly difficult as they moved away from the main route. Twice they had to clear fallen debris by hand, working quickly in the ongoing downpour. The radiation badges remained reassuringly inert, but the Geiger counter mounted on the vehicle's dashboard emitted occasional clicks, a reminder of invisible danger surrounding them. "How much longer to the way station?" Elena asked, checking her. "Medical supplies with the precision of someone preparing for contingencies. At this rate, another 8 hours." Peterson frowned at the rapidly darkening sky. "We'll need to travel through the night. Too dangerous to stop." As if in agreement, the vehicle's dashboard emitted a warning tone. Peterson checked a display and his expression tightened. "Proximity alert. Vehicle approaching from the southeast, moving fast." James moved to the rear window, scanning through the specialized optics of his rifle. Through the rain and gathering darkness, he spotted it. A light, tactical vehicle carrying what appeared to be 6 soldiers in Reclamation Force uniforms. "Pursuit team," he confirmed, "probably deployed by the helicopter before it lost visual contact 2 minutes out maximum." Peterson accelerated, pushing the vehicle to its limits on the treacherous terrain. "There's a sequence of switchbacks ahead, narrow passages, blind corners. If we can reach them first, we might gain some advantage." "Or be trapped," Elena observed. "Sometimes the only way forward is through greater danger," Peterson replied, his voice carrying the weight of experience. They reached the switchbacks just as the pursuing vehicle came into firing range. Bullets pinged off their reinforced rear armor as Peterson maneuvered through the first sharp turn. The path narrowed dramatically, barely wider than their vehicle, with a sheer rock face on one side and a steep drop on the other. "They'll need to slow down to follow," James noted. "Can't maintain their speed on this terrain, which gives us a chance to create a more permanent delay." Peterson handed him a small detonator. 3 remote mines in the rear compartment. If you can place them at the next switchback, we can trigger a rock slide that will block the path. It was a desperate plan, requiring split-second timing and considerable risk. At the next, relatively straight section, Peterson slowed just enough for James to exit the vehicle, moving with the mines to a strategic position where the cliff face showed signs of instability. Working quickly, he placed the devices, angling them to maximize the disruptive force against the already weather-weakened rock. The pursuing vehicle had slowed to navigate the treacherous turns, buying precious minutes, but was snow visible in the distance, approaching rapidly. James sprinted back to their transport just as Elena provided covering fire from the rear hatch, forcing the pursuers to momentarily take cover. The moment he was back inside, Peterson accelerated, navigating the next switchback with practiced skill. "Now," he ordered when they had put sufficient distance between themselves and the planted explosives. James triggered the detonator. The explosion echoed through the canyon, followed by the deeper rumble of collapsing rock. Through the rear window, they watched as tons of stone cascaded onto the path, forming an impenetrable barrier, just as the pursuit vehicle rounded the corner. "That won't stop them permanently," Peterson cautioned as they continued forward. "They'll find another route or clear. Enough debris to pass, but it buys us time." The night deepened around them as they pushed onward, the storm gradually abating to a steady drizzle. The terrain slowly transformed from rocky switchbacks to dense forest, the path occasionally disappearing entirely, recognizable only to Peterson's experienced eye. Elena tended to her wound, which had begun bleeding again during their frantic escape. James noticed her increasingly pale complexion with concern. "You need proper medical care," he said quietly. "I need to complete this mission," she countered, her voice strained but determined. "Haven's medical facilities can patch me up once we arrive." Peterson glanced back at them. "The way station has limited medical supplies. Enough to stabilize her until we reach Haven." James nodded, though concern lingered. Elena's determination was admirable, but the human body had limits that no amount of willpower could overcome. Her knowledge of Eastbrook's medical research made her as valuable to Haven as his engineering expertise, perhaps more so, given the specialized nature of the facility's biological systems. As they traveled through the night, James found his thoughts returning to Phoenix, to Elaine Winters, who had somehow survived the purge at Eastbrook to forge a new identity as a leader of the resistance against Mercer. Had she escaped the outpost? Or had she made the ultimate sacrifice to ensure their mission succeeded? The questions had no immediate answers, but they underscored the stakes of their journey. Haven represented more than just a safe haven. It embodied the best hopes for rebuilding something meaningful from the ashes of the old world. The knowledge they carried, both in their minds and in the data James had safeguarded for 5 years, might mean the difference between that hope flourishing or withering away. With renewed determination, he checked their weapons and supplies, preparing for whatever challenges lay ahead on the road to Haven. The hunter had become the hunted, but the true prize was larger than any of them. It was the future itself. Dawn broke with sullen grey light, filtering through lingering clouds as their vehicle approached the way station. Our enforced bunker built into the side of a hill, its entrance concealed by strategic placement of native vegetation. Peterson approached cautiously, using a series of light signals to identify themselves to whoever might be watching. After several tense moments, a section of what appeared to be solid rock face slid aside, revealing a narrow entrance just wide enough for their vehicle. Peterson drove inside, the door closing silently behind them. The interior was surprisingly well equipped, a small but functional operations center with communications equipment, weapons storage, medical supplies, and sleeping quarters. 3 people greeted them, their expressions a mixture of relief and wariness. "Peterson, we got Phoenix's emergency transmission before communications went dark," said a gray-haired woman, who appeared to be in charge. "She indicated you were bringing high-value assets." Her gaze shifted to James and Elena. "I'm Reese, station commander." "Dr. James Reeves and Dr. Elena Reyes," Peterson introduced them, both formerly of Eastbrook. "Facility, both with critical knowledge for Haven." Reese's eyebrows rose slightly. "Eastbrook survivors? That's unexpected." She gestured to a younger woman nearby. "Harper's our medic. She'll look at that wound, Dr. Reyes." Elena nodded gratefully, following Harper to a curtained medical area. James remained with Peterson and Reese, aware of their scrutiny. "Phoenix verified your identity?" Reese asked. "As much as circumstances allowed," James replied. "The outpost was attacked before full verification protocols could be completed." Reese nodded slowly. "Any word on Phoenix?" Peterson shook his head. "Communications were jammed. We don't know if she escaped." A heavy silence fell over the room, the absence of information carrying its own weight. Finally, Reese gestured toward a secure communications terminal. We need to contact Haven, inform them of your approach and status. They'll want to prepare appropriate verification procedures. She studied James with undisguised curiosity. If you really are Dr. Reeves, your arrival will cause quite a stir. You've been officially dead for 5 years. A necessary deception, James said simply. Reese nodded, understanding in her eyes. We've all left someone behind in this new world, either physically or in memory. She turned to the communications equipment, entering a complex sequence of codes. This will take time. Our secure channel to Haven uses frequency-hopping protocols to avoid detection. Why don't you get some rest? You look like you need it. James hadn't realized how exhausted he was until the adrenaline of their escape began to fade. He found a small alcove with a cot and collapsed onto it, his body demanding respite even as his mind continued racing through calculations and contingencies. He woke abruptly some hours later to urgent voices. Peterson stood over him, expression grim. We have a problem, he said without preamble. Long-range scouts have reported a massive reclamation force mobilization heading this way. At least 30 vehicles, heavy weapons, air support. James sat up immediately. How were we tracked? Unknown. But they're converging on this location with too much precision for it to be coincidence. Reese joined them, her earlier professional. A calm replaced by tense alertness. Haven has authorized emergency extraction. They're sending a specialized team to meet us at Checkpoint Delta, approximately 3 hours from here. We need to move immediately. What about Elena? Harper has stabilized. But she's weak. The journey will be difficult for her. Peterson's expression conveyed what he didn't say. Leaving Elena behind wasn't an option, regardless of the increased risk her condition created. Within 20 minutes, they had loaded essential supplies into 2 smaller, faster vehicles designed. For difficult terrain, Elena was carefully positioned in the lead vehicle, with Harper attending her, while James joined Peterson and Reese in the second. These vehicles have enhanced stealth capabilities, Reese explained, as they prepared to depart. Reduced thermal signature, sound dampening, radar-absorbing materials. They won't make us invisible, but they'll make tracking more difficult. The way station's exit on the opposite side of the hill opened onto a narrow ravine that wound through increasingly dense forest. Reese drove with practiced precision, following Peterson's lead vehicle at a careful distance, close enough for visual contact, far enough to react if the lead vehicle encountered trouble. If we're compromised, what's the contingency? James asked, checking the tactical rifle he'd been provided. Peterson has primary responsibility for getting Dr. Reyes to the checkpoint. Our job is to ensure they succeed, whatever that requires. Reese's meaning was clear. They would serve as a distraction or sacrifice if necessary. James nodded, accepting the logic. His knowledge of Haven's engineering systems made him valuable. But Elena's medical expertise addressed more immediate needs for the community. If choices had to be made, the mission parameters were clear. They traveled in tense silence through terrain that grew increasingly difficult to navigate. Dense undergrowth, marshy areas that threatened to bog down their vehicles, fallen trees that required careful maneuvering. The route deliberately avoided anything resembling an established path, reducing the risk of ambush but significantly slowing their progress. Haven's extraction team will consist of their elite security personnel, Reese said after nearly an hour, of silent travel. They rarely venture outside Haven's outer perimeter, so their deployment indicates how seriously they're taking your arrival. Or how seriously they're taking the threat, James noted. Reese nodded grimly. Mercer's forces have been probing Haven's defenses for years, but never with the level of resources currently being mobilized. Something's changed in his calculation. Me, James said simply. As long as I was just a ghost in the wasteland, I was manageable, a potential threat but no tan immediate one. Now that I'm verifiably alive and heading for Haven, I've become an active priority. Because of what you know. The override codes? James considered how much to reveal. Partly, but more importantly, because I designed Haven's maintenance protocols. Without regular system recalibration, the defensive and life support systems will begin to degrade. That deadline is approaching. Reese's eyes widened slightly. You're saying Haven is vulnerable? Not yet, but it will be, and Mercer knows it. He's been eliminating anyone with the expertise to maintain those systems, ensuring that eventually Haven would have no choice but to accept his protection. Their conversation was interrupted by an urgent signal from the lead vehicle. 3. Quick flashes of light indicating they should stop and take cover. Reese immediately guided their vehicle into a dense thicket, activating full stealth protocols that reduced their energy signature to near ambient levels. Through the reinforced windshield, James could see Peterson's vehicle, similarly concealed about 50 yards ahead. For several tense minutes, nothing moved except the gentle sway of branches in the light breeze. Then he heard it, the distinctive thrum of helicopter rotors approaching from the north. Not just one aircraft, but several, moving in coordinated search pattern. They shouldn't be able to track us through this canopy, Reese whispered, though the helicopter crews couldn't possibly hear them. Unless they're not tracking our vehicles, James realized suddenly. Elena's wound, what if Mercer's men tagged her somehow during the attack at Rook's trading post? A subcutaneous tracker embedded in the shrapnel. Reese's expression darkened. It's possible. They've used similar tactics before. She activated a secure, short-range communicator. Peterson, possible tracker on Dr. Reyes. Harper needs to scan the wound site immediately. Through their concealment, they watched as Harper performed a hurried examination of Elena's wound using a handheld scanner. After several tense moments, Peterson's voice came through the communicator. Confirmed, small transmitter embedded near the rib cage, military grade, designed to mimic surrounding tissue to avoid detection by standard methods. Can it be removed? Reese asked. Not safely under field conditions, Harper's voice replied. It's positioned too close to major blood vessels. Removal requires surgical facilities. The helicopters grew closer, their search pattern tightening as they homed in on the transmitter's signal. They had perhaps minutes before their position was pinpointed. We need to split up, James decided. Elena stays with Peterson and Harper, continuing to the extraction point. The tracker means they'll be followed, but if we create a sufficient diversion, we can draw off enough of Mercer's forces to give them a fighting chance. And how do we create this diversion? Reese asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. James held up the data drive containing his accumulated research and Haven's engineering specifications. We give Mercer a more tempting target, me and this. Reese considered the plan silently, then nodded once. It's tactically sound, but extremely high risk for you. Higher risk for everyone if we stay together. James was already gathering essential supplies into a pack. I'll head east, toward the radiation zone. The contamination will discourage close pursuit, and I know how to navigate through the hotspots safely. The decision made, they communicated the plan to Peterson. James approached their vehicle briefly to speak with Elena, who was pale but conscious. This isn't how I imagined reaching Haven, she said weakly. You'll get there. Tell them. He hesitated, suddenly aware of how many people he had known at Eastbrook who might now be at Haven. Tell them James Reeves kept his promise. The data is secure, and I'll find a way to deliver it. Elena grasped his hand briefly. Be careful. Mercer wants you alive, but his men aren't always precise in following orders. With a final nod to Peterson and Harper, James returned to Reese's vehicle. They waited until the lead vehicle had slipped away through the forest before implementing the second phase of their plan. Ready? Reese asked, her hand on the ignition. As I'll ever be. Reese activated the vehicle's systems, but rather than moving stealthily, she deliberately allowed the power signature to spike, a beacon to any monitoring equipment. Then she accelerated hard, crashing through the undergrowth in a direction perpendicular to Peterson's route. The response was immediate. 2 of the 3 helicopters veered sharply, following their now obvious trail. In the distance, the rumble of ground vehicles indicated Mercer's forces were converging as well. "They're taking the bait," Reese confirmed, maneuvering aggressively through the forest. "Now we just need to stay alive long enough for Peterson to reach the extraction point." They burst from the forest edge onto more open terrain, rolling hills leading toward the distant shimmer of a radiation zone, visible as a heat mirage on the horizon. Reese pushed their vehicle to its limits, weaving unpredictably to avoid giving the helicopter gunners a clear shot. The first missiles struck nearby, sending geysers of earth skyward. The second came closer, close enough that shrapnel pinged against their armor plating. Reese's driving was masterful, but against air support, their options were rapidly diminishing. "There," James pointed toward a narrow canyon entrance ahead. "That ravine leads to the edge of the radiation zone. The rock walls will provide cover from air attack." Reese nodded grimly, adjusting their course. As they approached the canyon, a ground vehicle appeared on a parallel path, a light tactical unit carrying reclamation force soldiers. The driver clearly intended to cut them off before they could reach the protective ravine. "Hold on!" Reese warned, then executed a sharp turn directly toward their pursuers. The unexpected maneuver momentarily confused the opposing driver, creating a split-second hesitation that Reese exploited ruthlessly. She accelerated directly at the tactical vehicle, then swerved at the last possible moment, clipping its rear quarter and sending it into an uncontrolled spin. The victory was short-lived. As they recovered and headed again for the canyon entrance, a missile from one of the helicopters struck the ground directly in their path. The explosion lifted their vehicle, flipping it onto its side in a shower of dirt and shattered components. James regained consciousness to the taste of blood and the smell of leaking fuel. The vehicle lay on its side, the frame buckled from the impact. Beside him, Reese hung limp in her restraints, a deep gash across her forehead. Whether she was alive or dead, he couldn't immediately tell. Outside, he could hear voices approaching, reclamation force soldiers securing the crash site. The data drive was still in his pocket, miraculously intact. Now faced with capture, James had to make an impossible choice: destroy the drive to keep it from Mercer's hands, or preserve it in hopes of someday completing his mission to Haven. As booted feet crunched on broken glass and metal outside the shattered windshield, James made his decision. He had come too far, sacrificed too much, to surrender now. The drifter opened his eyes to the sterile white ceiling of an unfamiliar room. For a moment, disorientation clouded his thoughts, until the events preceding his capture cascaded back. The crash, Reese's unconscious form, Mercer's soldiers closing in, and his final, desperate gamble. "You're fortunate to be alive, Dr. Reeves," came a familiar voice from the doorway. "Though I suppose fortune has little to do with it. You've always been resourceful." Colonel Richard Mercer stood framed in the doorway, his military posture unchanged from 5 years ago. Only the increased grey at his temples and the deeper lines around his eyes suggested the passage of time. His uniform was immaculate, the insignia of the reclamation force prominently displayed. "Where am I?" the drifter asked, his voice hoarse. "A medical facility within New Prosperity. What remains of it, at least." Mercer stepped into the room. "Your friends put up an admirable resistance, but ultimately futile." Cold dread settled in the drifter's stomach. "Elena? Peterson? Dr. Reyes is in custody. As for the Pathfinder guide," Mercer's slight shrug conveyed callous indifference to Peterson's fate. The drifter tried to sit up, discovering his wrists were secured to the bed frame with reinforced restraints. A monitoring device on his chest tracked his vital signs, the data displayed on a screen nearby. "The data drive," he said finally. "Ah, yes. Your insurance policy. Mercer smiled thinly. Quite clever, swallowing it before capture. Our medical team recovered it during your treatment. Damaged, unfortunately, but our technical specialists are working to salvage what they can. Relief washed through the drifter, carefully concealed behind an expression of defeat. The drive they'd recovered was a decoy, containing enough legitimate data to seem authentic, but corrupted in ways that would waste Mercer's resources while revealing nothing of true value. The real drive remained hidden within a false compartment in his boot, which now sat among his belongings in the corner of the room. It was never going to work, James, Mercer continued, using his first name with deliberate familiarity. Your crusade against me, your search for haven. You've merely delayed the inevitable. And what's that? Reunification. Order restored from chaos. The reclamation of what remains of our civilization under proper authority. Mercer stepped closer. What do you think happens when Haven's systems begin to fail, when their precious sanctuary can no longer sustain itself? They'll need what only I can provide. Security, resources, technical expertise. Dictatorship disguised as salvation, the drifter replied quietly. Mercer laughed softly. Always the idealist, even after everything you've seen. He moved toward the door. Rest while you can. Once you're stable enough to travel, we'll move to a more secure facility. Your expertise will finally serve a proper purpose. After Mercer departed, the drifter tested his restraints, solid, but perhaps not insurmountable, with time and determination. Through the window, he could see New Prosperity's college campus, now partially occupied by Reclamation Force soldiers. But beyond that, almost invisible in the distant mountains, a thin trail of smoke rose skyward. A signal. Phoenix was alive. The extraction team from Haven had engaged, and where there was life, there was possibility. The drifter closed his eyes, conserving strength for what would come next. The hunt wasn't over, it had merely entered its final, decisive phase.